MLK Day. For those of us that are solopreneurs, we are still at it. We're out there making content and making things happen. Today, I have a super exciting guest for you guys. Rishad Tobaccowala is actually the only guest who is a return guest. For 7 years, I've interviewed over 270 marketing leaders, and I've never recycled a guest until today. Rishad was actually guest number 3 in 2018. We had an opportunity to sit down together in a cigar lounge in Chicago, and Rishad talked about some pretty prescient things that we will go over today in the show way back then. And we'll get into some of the meat of that, but he was predicting the displacement of what was going to happen around AI and what we were calling machine learning back then. And I think a lot of his predictions have come true. And those of you who follow his writing, that was one of the reasons why I wanted to have him back on and bring us up to current. So before we get into that, though, I want to give him a little bit of bio, and then I'll let him also give us some of the cliff notes. But Rishad is a globally renowned author and speaker and advisor and marketing innovator with over 4 decades of experience helping organizations and leaders reinvent themselves in times of transformation. He most recently served as Global Chief Strategy and Chief Growth Officer at Publicis, one of the world's largest communications and marketing firms, and remains a senior advisor at the company. Rishad's work spans brand strategy, digital innovation, and future trends in business, earning him recognition as one of BusinessWeek's top business leaders and one of Time's 5 marketing innovators. He's also the author of Restoring the Soul of Business, Staying Human in the Age of Data, and Rethinking Work. And he publishes a widely read weekly thought letter, The Future Does Not Fit in Containers of the Past. Rishad is also chairman of the Tobaccowala Foundation, which expands access to health and education in India. And he holds an MBA from the University of Chicago, Booth School of Business, and a BS in mathematics from the University of Bombay. Rishad, thanks so much for coming back on. Really appreciate you being our first return guest.
Well, Dylan, thank you very much for both inviting me, both the first time and the second time. The first time we were, as you say, in a wonderful cigar lounge. This time we're not because of our scheduling, though you did offer me the opportunity to re-cigar, but I wasn't in town. But thank you for that introduction, and I'm ready to hopefully earn my keep as a second guest.
I love it.
Second time guest.
I love it. Well, look, most of the people in the industry know you. There might be some folks, from outside of the industry that don't. But anything else that you want to cover off on your bio that I didn't cover?
No, I think that you've covered pretty much everything sort of in the bio. Outside of, I also happen to sort of be based in Chicago, where I've spent pretty much my entire American life. Grew up in India, and I have my wife and I have 2 daughters in their mid-30s.
Awesome. Well, that's always the most important thing to mention for sure. So, I've been following along with your writings. You've been popping up in my Facebook algorithm almost on a weekly basis, and I love what you do. You kind of take some key points from your Substack and kind of reframe them from your Facebook audience. Yep. Facebook's fun because it's like almost your friends, yep. A little bit more. It's like almost like your tightest network now is kind of your Facebook network. But I always enjoy scanning your headlines and then clicking through and going a little bit deeper on the Substack. But it just got me thinking about our original conversation and way back in Chicago, in 2018. And I didn't take the direct quote, but the paraphrase was, we spent a lot of time talking about machine learning at that time. We weren't quite branding it as AI, as kind of consumer-facing AI. But in 2018, you were predicting the rapid expansion of technology beyond the likes of what any of us could comprehend, and a massive displacement to the workforce, and how we even talk about what a job is in the coming future. And one of the things that you mentioned was, we're going to really have to figure out what to do with this as a community, as employers, as a society at large, or people are going to be out in the streets with pitchforks, and we better watch out. As I sadly scan the headlines of what's happening, around our country and around the world these days, it does feel like we are in pitchfork moments. Maybe not at peach pickfork. People aren't storming the Bastille quite yet with a guillotine. But how do you feel about that comment? Would you like to maybe kind of bring us up to current on the things that you were thinking about way back in 2018 and how they've really, really very much come true in the current moment?
Absolutely. So, one of the reasons that a lot of people pay attention, I guess, to what I've written and what I share is over the years, I've tended to get almost everything right, which is sort of unusual. In fact, on my Substack some time ago, I shared a document that I actually wrote 10 years ago, or now it's 14 years ago. I think I shared this document 3 years ago. That 13 years ago, I was asked by the Wall Street Journal of India, called the Economic Times, to predict what would happen in the next decade. And I gave them 10, 10 sort of things that I think were predictions. And 10 years later, I went back and I wrote this piece on how surprisingly I got all 10 right. And then I said, okay, let's try it again. And I wrote another 10. When we were talking in 2018, I had started writing and started thinking about my first book, which came out in January of 2020. And it was called Restoring the Soul of Business, Staying Human in the Age of Data. And that book continues to sell really well, even though it's 5.5 years old, because of two reasons. One is everything I wrote there is evergreen. And literally, you can read the entire book and you think I wrote it yesterday. And it ends with a chapter on AI. By 2020, or by a few months after we talked, I started writing about AI. So it's a book that came out in 2020 that has a chapter on AI, right? That's 2.5 years before ChatGPT. But as importantly, in the entire book, I have exactly one thing that requires revision. So in a 250-page book, one thing, and it's not a
Wow.
major thing, and that is I compared two airlines to two airlines and showed how these two airlines were better than the other two airlines. And the two airlines that weren't doing well at that time were American and United, and the two that were Delta and Southwest.
Mm.
And 8 years later, Southwest and United have switched places. And it's now, United and Delta are the two more important things. And part of the reason is it actually supports my hypothesis that it was about culture and about product. And after that, United changed its CEO, who invested a lot in culture and product and technology. Um, so outside of that, I got it right. But coming back to this, I actually kept on that theme. And a year ago, I wrote my second book, which you mentioned, called Rethinking Work. And part of the reason I wrote that is I began to realize how much work would be impacted by a lot of things, but also what I call alien intelligence. So I
Mm.
basically call artificial intelligence alien intelligence because it isn't human, but it doesn't feel like a machine. Especially today, where the top three uses from the consumer perspective of AI is not necessarily generative AI and creating, visuals, but it's basically for relationships, therapy, and companionship,
Mm.
right? Um, and but my basic predicament was as a under sort of undergraduate in advanced mathematics. I said, these things are going to be getting better and better, and at some particular time, they're going to do more and more of what currently people are doing. Okay, and so now we have in Davos, which started today, the big theme is obviously, besides Mr. Trump, is AI, and agentic AI, which is very, very extraordinary. And as of last week, um, two things sort of happened. One was Claude came out with Cowork, which is their it basically gives you and I the ability who don't know code to basically give Claude access to one of our folders and ask it to do things. So a friend of mine basically screenshots things. So he's got screenshots in a folder and he asked Claude Cowork to organize it, create a taxonomy, extract key learnings, right? Without writing any code. It did all of that without him knowing code. Um, and early indications are that with agentic, things tend to get 40 to 50% faster and 40 to 50% more cost effective. And I think it'll be even better than that as we move forward. So it gives birth to, okay, if the machines are going to do more and more, what are the humans going to do? And that is that whole predicament, which is, people say the big problem with AI will be it'll blow up. There'll be a nuclear bomb, a biological weapon. I think the two areas where AI is going to be resisted and it's going to have a big deal happening in 2026 midterms or definitely 2028 presidential elections is its impact on humans and jobs.
Mm.
And I actually, as you mentioned in our warm up, I'm actually very positive. So I'm not a Cassandra who says this is the end of the world. But what I am suggesting to people is there are three things that are about to happen. And these three things are so mind blowing that they have to be solved for in order for the positive thing to happen. So, what is the first? The first is I believe that we are in the United States at peak full time jobs. We will never have as many peak full time jobs as we have today. And by the way, I'm an optimist, right? But notice what I said. We're at peak full time jobs. I did not say we are at peak jobs, and I did not say we are at peak work or at peak opportunity. I just said we're at peak full time jobs. Okay. Number two, I believe that jobs are a silly phase that work is going through. And increasingly, companies are going to ask, we need work to be done. Why are we organizing around jobs? Very much like we say, we would like to listen to a romantic music, and we either create or we basically access a playlist. We don't have a bunch of CDs, right? Uh, and as a result, that's the second, which is A, we're peak full time jobs. Second is jobs and work are being separated from each other, which is very, very important. And third, which is the other big issue, is that in the United States, and let's just focus on the US, there are two things that are very, very critical that go with jobs. One is healthcare. In the US, to get good healthcare, you need to have a job, especially now if the president gets his way and they truly increase the premiums 50, 100, 150% on what was known as the Affordable Care Act. There's a real issue because without proper healthcare, you got a problem. And in the US, it's associated with jobs, if that makes sense. The
Mhm.
other one is if we go away from peak full time jobs and we go to fractional employment and we go to agentic employment, how do companies work and how do we work? Because yesterday it was announced that McKinsey has 60,000 employees, 40,000 of them are humans, and 20,000 of them are agents. Now, they had 45,000 employees, they now have 40. So it's not that the agents have taken away the humans' jobs. In fact, the humans do things like aspiration and curiosity and empathy and imagination that the machines don't do. But we're going to go into a world where we're going to basically say, how do humans supplement the machines rather than how do the machines help the humans? Okay.
Yeah,
And
that's
those three key shifts, which is job and work being uncoupled, how humans help the machines versus machines help sort of the humans. And what do we do in an economy where a majority of full-time jobs are going to disappear? There will be jobs, but there'll be fractional jobs, 60%, 80%, 50%. Um, so that's the pack, and that needs to be solved because it basically means we have to think about healthcare. We have to think very differently about education and retraining. We have to think completely about different organizational design in a firm. And too many companies are focusing and believing that the future of work happens to be the office. And my basic belief is no company today, in their right mind, if they were starting a company, would basically be building around an office and full time employment with talent only having to be in the city where the office is. Modern companies today are AI first talent anywhere, right? So we at the crisis, we don't have a technological crisis, we have a leadership crisis. And that is the big issue, which is going to get people excitable. Now, all of these are solvable, and my book shows how they can be solved. Okay. And I'm just one author, and I have a show now called the Rethinking Work Show where I talk to people. And it's not easily solvable, but solvable. But once it's solvable, and once it's solved, the upside of what technology can provide in enabling wealth creation, opportunity, breakthroughs in medicine, breakthroughs in energy, right, is incredible. So I'm a pragmatic enthusiast. So I'm neither a Pollyanist, which is everything's going to be fine, nor a doom monger, but I'm a pragmatic sort of enthusiast, which is sort of a realist. But to get from A to B, we require human leadership, right? And organizational redesign versus basically saying, A, the world is coming to an end or the world isn't going to change. It is. And I've always basically said AI is underhyped. And I think 2026 is going to be the year you're going to see the financial impact, both positive and negative, of AI. You don't have to wait till 2028 or 2029.
Yeah, I love that. Well, you said so much that I want to jump
Sure.
into. I'll start with my own experience. So, um, I've been in our industry for 15 years. I only ever had two jobs.
Right.
I was the first business development guy at Channel Factory. Started with Tony when he was a 19-year-old kid, took them to 38 million. They're now the world's largest YouTube agency at 1.2 billion a year. And then I joined a small influencer agency and was with them for 9 years. And that's when you and I met, and you went on my co-founder's show, Jess's show as well at one
Yeah.
point, I believe. So when I was laid off from that agency, when we lost Adobe, which was our top heavy client for 7 years, I didn't get those full-time chief revenue officer offers like I used to get every single year from recruiters. And at first I was really scared. I was like, holy cow, like these full-time CRO jobs that pay, mid six figures in salary aren't just falling in my lap like they used to. What am I going to do? And then I went into this fractional world and I started doing biz dev for smaller companies that wanted to get in front of the media agency and the brand marketer world. And then flash forward a year and a half, I'm making more money than I've ever made in my life. I'm more satisfied because I don't have all of my eggs in one particular client. So if I lose one client, there's usually 50 in the pipeline to take their place. And I'm getting to invest more time in what I'm truly passionate about, which is the podcast and
Yeah.
interviewing thought leaders like yourself. And the day job is pretty much just to fund the podcast at this point. So I totally feel that. And I think it's been actually a positive development in my career. And then the other thing, though, that you mentioned is the healthcare thing. I currently do not have health insurance.
Right.
I had health insurance my entire life, good plans, from small companies or whatever, but I still had a decent healthcare plan. And now as an individual, as an individual, entrepreneur at 44 years old with good health, I just decided to roll the dice and say, screw it. I'm going to wait until I retire or whatever, because I just don't
Yeah.
see the value in it. So I totally see what you're saying.
Yeah. It is. And I think, what you also mentioned, which is very critical is what I try to advise people is that today, every single person, regardless of what they do, uh, you and I worked in large firms. I worked for a long, long time in a large firm. And I was, very fortunate that I sort of um, worked to slowly start my new career and continue to work with my old firm. So I didn't even have the had to go through the pain of being laid off or anything, right?
Hmm.
But what I advise everybody who works in any kind of job, including a full time job, is three things. The first is you are the head of your HR department. Your HR department is not your friend. Okay. If you think your HR department is your friend, you are crazy. Your HR department is paid by the CEO of your company, right? And they are not your friend. You have to take charge of your own career. Do not outsource it to HR. I'm a big believer in HR and talent and development, but their incentives are not your incentives. Their incentives are to get rid of you, to minimize how much they pay you. Your job is to maximize your optionality and maximize your wealth. Very different. Okay. That's sort of number one. So take it, don't listen to Carrie Underwood. Jesus should not take the wheel. You need to take the wheel when it comes to career. Okay. That's number one. Number two, the most important thing in the world is optionality. If you can basically have multiple clients, multiple workflows, multiple opportunities, multiple gigs, that gives you the ability not only to basically, if you lose one, you've got others, as you mentioned, but it allows you to basically speak truth to power and be really effective,
Hmm.
right? If you don't need anybody, if you don't need anyone specific, you can actually be quite honest with people nicely, respectfully. And the third, which is very important, which you've done. So in my book, I have a chapter called Side Gigs and Side Hustles. And I had a person who wrote to me and I talked with them, and they write a terrific Substack, and they were recommending my Substack. And so I went and I reached out to them there in England, and I talked to them and they said, Rishad, we've read your book. This is really good, but you get one thing wrong in my current book. So I said, what is that one thing? They said, you're writing your chapter on gig work and side hustles, etc. But you think that the side hustle or the side gig is the other thing we do. And then the main job is the one that we're going from to 9 to 5. He said, for some of us, our main job is really the side hustle or side gig. The 9 to 5 is our venture capital to do what we really want to do. And
Mm.
you just reminded me with that, which says, I have a job and then I have this love, which is the podcast. And that reverse is also something I tell people to do, which is obviously we need to have jobs, we need to have credibility, we need to have income, otherwise we can't live. But we're moving into a world with new marketplaces, new tools, AI, everything else that allows you to basically both have your cake or eat it too, or at some particular stage, have your main job or a job fund what you really want to do for the rest of your life.
I love that. Yeah. And I definitely see it in my own work. So, something that I've been talking to a lot of leaders recently is that if AI is giving us, as you mentioned, between 50 to 60% efficiency gains, potentially time back on our calendars every day, where do you think people should be investing that time? From my perspective, I now spend every other week in the field at a conference, whether it's a big cultural moment where you and I intersected last week at CES, or whether it's with a smaller marketing conference with a group of 100 people. My feeling is now that I don't have to be in the office all the time, I should be out in the world building relationships and shaking hands and looking people in the eyes and getting off Zoom, whenever possible. What do you think people should be doing with this free time that they're, getting back from AI? And is it a case by case basis for each type
Right.
of person, or are there some general themes?
Well, first of all, it is a case by case basis because right now, most people actually are finding something odd happening. that while AI is supposed to create these efficiencies and effectiveness, it actually is requiring them to work even more. Because what companies are basically doing is saying the efficiency and effectiveness comes to us, it doesn't come to you.
Mm,
Okay.
got it.
So,
Yep.
one of the things that companies are doing is they're basically saying we're going to get more work done with fewer people, or more work done with the same people. Or it basically frees people up to do additional things that they couldn't do when their old job required them. But the other thing that's basically happening is many of them are having to spend time either on the side or through their company learning some of these tools. So, for instance, I don't have quote unquote a regular job, like you don't have a regular job. And I'm older than you by 2 decades. And so I'm at a particular stage of life where I don't even need to have a job. Okay. If that makes sense.
Of course.
And I spend an hour or so a day learning new things, not just AI, but I would probably say maybe 2 hours, 2 to 3 hours a week, which is AI specific, and another 4 or 5 on other things. And it's usually more than that, but I recommend people that they spend at least an hour a day learning. Okay. So inside companies, people are starting to figure out, oh shit, I got to learn this stuff because it's really, really important. So I would say that if you've got free time, there are three areas that you should invest it in. One is to invest and learn about AI because it's huge, it's big, and a simple way of doing it is invest ideally up to $60 a month, but if you can, if you don't have that budget, at least $20 a month by, depending on who you are, by paying for the premium version of either, you don't have to pay for the professional $200 version or the $1,000 versions, but $20 versions of either Anthropic's Claude or Google's Gemini or OpenAI's ChatGPT. Okay. To me, those are the three that are worth looking at. Uh, if you are tending to be more in the code world, probably Claude's the right one. Um, in most other cases, I'm increasingly inclined to Gemini versus OpenAI ChatGPT. But
Interesting.
I pay for all three, which is right. And I also basically, use Adobe Firefly and 11 Box and a whole bunch of other things. Okay. But you should invest in the money and you should learn about it, use about it. There are books to read like Cointelligence by Ethan Mollick, who also writes a wonderful Substack called One Useful Thing. There are a lot of people you can follow on YouTube. There are people you can follow on X to learn. So it's a if you give some time and $20 a month to up to $60 a month, you get some fantastic education. That's number one thing I would do. Number two, I would basically do is very much what you basically said. I think the future of a career is based on being resilient.
Mm,
And in order for your career to be resilient, you need to be relevant and you need relationships. Relevance comes from in part, continuously upgrading your mental operating system and learning. But relevance also means understanding what the hell is going on. And that is going to conferences, connecting with people, and then relationships are obviously relationships. So that's so relevance. I mean, if you want resilience, the future is resilience, relevance, and relationships. But resilience in part comes from relationships and relevance. If you have good relationships and you have relevance, you're likely to be resilient.
yeah, it's interesting. It almost
Okay,
feels like AI is giving us the opportunity to be more human because we can
yes,
step out from behind the screen
step out
and
from
be
behind
with
the
people.
seat. Right. So one is obviously invest time in learning. Second is obviously go meet people, go figure out what the trends are, figure out the thing. And the third one is to be self aware, to figure out what you are passionate about and what you also are probably good at. And at some stage, how do you basically combine those two into what the market needs so that you can basically have that ideal version. So I explained to people, I said, look, there are a lot of people who are passionate about singing and they sing in the shower. That's great, but they're not very good and no one's going to pay them, right? Sometimes you can be a fantastic musician, but unless you have a great breakthrough, it's hard to earn a living full time as a musician for most people, right? You do that as a side gig, a side hustle. It's hard, but you're good at it. The ideal is to be passionate about something, to be good at something, and some combination of those two combines with some market, and you get paid. So I've written an exercise which you can um, potentially post on your notes. It's
Yeah, I'll put it in
called
the show notes.
yeah. So it's the place which it's an article I just shared with someone who had asked me for some input. It's called career architecting. Okay, so if people type in career architecting and my name, or it's in the show notes, and it's a process on how every individual can do an exercise to figure out what they're passionate about, how to then build credibility and platforms about it, step by step by step. And I show how I did it. So I show the theory, which came from my practice, but I made it into actually a repeatable theory. And then I show how I applied it, right? And how I built it over time. And people look at it and say, oh wow, this is great. I said, you need to work at it. So it's not like you just read something and you do it and it's there. But I said, if you work at it this way, you'll actually come there. So I would tell people, learn and build skills, go build relationships, go to places, become relevant, right? And third, understand how you can build this unique combination of purpose and credibility and monetization. And if you do those, it's going to be very, very successful. Now, the one other thing that I would recommend people to do, which is the human part, but it's also almost contra, is to not spend all the time thinking about themselves, to try to get
Mm,
out of their mind and to spend about 20% of their time helping other people with generosity and not worrying about what will I get back. Okay? Because generosity to me is an amazing strategy. When you help other people, you help yourself because you feel good. When you help yourself, other people, you start learning things that you aren't aware of. And at some particular stage, those people will possibly come and help you, right? But often when I read a lot about how people should build their careers and build reputation, it's too much I, me, mine. There has to be an I, me,
mm.
mine, otherwise nothing happens. But I would say try to also spend at least 20% of your time helping others generously in any way that you can, because those become very, very important.
I love that. It's kind of karmic in a way, right? Like
Yeah,
I try to be generous with asterisks. Like if somebody asks me to take them, go to coffee with them and give them
yeah.
advice, as long as they're willing to go to the coffee shop that's 6 minutes down the road, I'll do it. But I'm
Oh
not
yeah, yeah,
driving.
absolutely, and exactly.
So Rashad, I wanted to, since I have you today, I think you've given us such great advice on the macro level, and you've done such an amazing job in predicting the how the world was going to change in business, especially around the adoption of these new technologies. But as somebody who spent and still continues to spend over 40 years inside of the agency world, especially in the holdco world at one of the biggest in the world. I'd be remiss to not get your comments specifically on the marketing agency and world at large. Tectonic forces at play with the IPG Omnicom merger. You see some Dentsu trying to sell their US division and ramming up against some walls. But then Publicis being on a bit of a, wind tear. Without the bias of Publicis, could you give us a little bit of commentary on kind of the agency world in general and what their place is in the future. Maybe comment briefly on the holdco space and the emergence and continuation of the indie space.
Sure. So, um, for people who are sort of listening, they need to know two things. One is I'm out of the day to day, so I'm not as what I would say conversant in the space as I used to be. That's number one. And second, which you've already sort of mentioned, is I have a bias towards a particular company, if that makes sense. Uh, um, and so, both keeping the fact that I'm a little outside of the day to day for now over 6 years, and that I have a certain bias, here is what I would say. So, let me begin broadly with the industry. I believe that broadly advertising will continue to be a great industry. Advertising, marketing services, whatever you call it. Okay. That I have written about this. The Economist used this particular quote of mine without attribution, but most people do, which is about 10, 12 years ago. I basically said everybody basically believes that agencies are dinosaurs, and I believe we're cockroaches. Okay. So I basically believe we may not be liked by many people, but we scurry around, hide in the corners, decide what needs to be done, and recreate ourselves. So, and the reason I wrote that was about 15 years ago, people said advertising agencies are dead because of digital. And if you now look at most of the holding companies or even other agencies, it's a much bigger industry today than it was before. Okay. So, when everybody basically says it's all gone and dead, not true. Now, that being said, the dynamics of the industry are very different and will continue to be very different as we go to the future. So the first is, I think the idea of a holding company is
Mm.
yesterday's news. And, you know, Publicis moved away from a holding company model into very much what they call a power of one platform model, which now is built around their sort of Marcel platform, including that's what they're going to call potentially, their future sort of AI stuff. But they reorganized the company built on around clients first and talent second, and not the individual brands. So yes, the brand, Starcom and the brand Leo Burnett and the brand Saatchi Saatchi or Leo now all exist, but the focus basically is clients basically say, how do you solve my problem? How do you solve it with great people cost effectively? And don't tell me why five different brands have to come with five different CEOs to tell me why a Digitas can do this better than a Starcom can do this better, right? But what that requires is major cultural change and major lots of other things. And so a lot of the large holding companies have not yet been able to do that, but they're working on it. Omnicom is smart. Ren is very smart. I don't know the new CEO of WPP, but she clearly was a successful individual. And I believe that they will have a place and they will all do fine. I believe that there is going to be a renaissance in three other areas. So I'm not saying they're gone away. There are three other areas. The first is small and independent agencies are growing faster than the bigger companies. Primarily, one of the reasons is because of
Mm.
AI. AI basically is the slingshot that allows David to fight at the same level as Goliath. Okay. At $60, I could do a whole bunch of stuff as an individual that nobody could basically do. Like, yesterday I wrote a Substack using Claude, and it was based on what I believe are the seven big strategic shifts coming, or the seven interconnected forces. And every one of those charts, which are absolutely wonderful, I use Claude on. Okay.
Mm.
And I could never come up when people said, "Well, how did you come up with this stuff?" Well, I just did that with Claude. And between my thinking about it and writing, it took about 3 hours. But I had to think of the concepts and then I had the supporting evidence. It wasn't that Claude came up with the concepts. I came up with the concepts, but I used it both as a thought partner and I used it to come up with the imagery. But now I can do this at a much faster rate. because of things like Zoom, because I can make, reservations on my app, because of a whole bunch of other things. I can scale much faster as an individual or small company than large companies. So there'll be a bias towards what's the benefit of this large scale organization. So small companies will do particularly well. Second is, they're going to be completely new types of agencies born. Anytime there's these kinds of things, whether they call themselves agencies or service companies, there'll be agentic companies that'll be agentic first. There'll be companies that'll say, okay, the entire $100 billion research world requires to be reinvented. So new companies are coming out in the world of research. Everything from sort of agentic focus groups and a whole bunch of other things. So there'll be a second. So smaller agencies will go really well. Second is, what you're going to basically see is new types of companies coming all over the place, which is very, very important. And third is, I believe we're going to enter a massive new age of creativity, because
Mm.
up to now, what has benefited companies is superior plumbing. So the big breakthroughs have been on the media side of the business, finding the right person at the right place at the right time. What we've not been able to do is now then give them a personalized message or interaction. A combination of both AI as well as generative AI, which allows you for creativity, is going to make storytelling much more interesting and important. And it's going to basically allow people to create amazing stories for cost effectively for very little money. The idea of having $3 billion to make a Marvel movie will be a part of the past.
Mm.
$300 million movies will be made for $35 million or $50 million, and someone can shoot Tangerine Dreams on their iPhone some time ago. You can do things today. So there'll be an unleashment of creativity. And I believe that broadly, the agency space at its heart is basically about moving people's heart using numbers. I always basically say a brand, you know, is, or a story is data with a soul, right? And so to a great extent, new types of agencies, big emphasis on smaller agencies, the ability for talent to unleash in different creative ways is going to be good for the industry. So the structure of the industry will look very different, but the industry, I think, will be bigger. Now, bigger in what way? I think the industry will be bigger, but maybe smaller in people.
Yeah,
If
no,
that makes
yeah, that's great. That's
okay.
crazy. It's
Ah,
something that you said from the regards of creativity. Over the holiday, I had always had this idea of this ad that I wanted to make, for my little consultancy. And I had it, I had storyboarded the whole thing in my brain, but always thought it would be too expensive to go hire a production company to do it. And then I went on Adobe Firefly and actually made the ad for my fractional consultancy on
yes,
my own with.
yes. And if you haven't used it, and I haven't used it myself, I've seen people use it and read about it, but I
Uh-huh.
will when I have the time, because it's been out for about 6 days, and have not had made the thing of that. Is apparently Claude Cowork is absolutely incredible,
Interesting.
because it does stuff that, it's this vibe code, it does things.
It's wild.
And you should try it. Like, and as a writer, Casey Newton, who writes Platformer, showed 5 uses for it, which is kind of interesting. So people are showing uses of it. The folks at Axios, I think it was Jim Vanderhei, used it on his phone. And almost everybody basically says this is like the aha moment, which is just like ChatGPT said, wow, this is real. Claude Cowork says, oh my God, I can use it myself on the folders. Basically, you give it permission to access a folder on your computer, and it starts doing things that you ask it to do. So a friend of mine basically screenshots presentations, and it did a taxonomy, extracted the key learnings from the screenshots and offered it to him. It says it took him about He gave it instructions. It took about 45 minutes, and it did the equivalent of about 15 days of work.
That's crazy. Well, that's a great tip. I'll definitely be checking that out as well. Well, I know you've got to run here soon,
Right.
but I wanted to ask you. I interviewed Paul Wilmington last week, and he mentioned that you guys are working on something together called the Athena Project. Is that something you're willing to talk about publicly, or can you talk about what Athena is?
Sure, I can talk about the Theatre Project publicly, and in fact, there'll be some parts of it that'll be accessible to everybody for free, and then other parts of it is not saying mysterious to member invitation, and I'll explain. And that's not like some snooty handshake club. There's something about it. So Athena has been co-founded by Koliani, who actually came up with the idea, and myself. Uh, and project is about modern leadership issue, but we're sort of focusing on an age group. It's not necessarily age gated, but who are about 45 to 65 who are trying to figure out what the hell to do in this new world where there's generational stuff, new technology. I might be retired before I want to. How do I grow up? What's my next act, etc. Right? Uh, so, and how do I even lead? How do I lead myself? How do I lead my company? So we've basically done that. And what we've done is it's going to be a combination of convening, content, and community. So the convening is we basically put together salons with about 80 to 90 people that uh, are at various places. We just came back from one in Silicon Valley last week, um, where we had 80, 90 people, and their conversations that we have. What's very unlike other sort of events is there's no selling. It's Chatham House rule. So you can share what you learned, but not who you learned it from. No one's are out to sell. There's no pitching. It's conversational with some, moderation. We had amazing guests, and we have amazing spaces. And our partners are people like Boston Consulting Group, and SAP, and University of Chicago. That part is by membership, invitation, etc. What is remarkable about it, it's Hermes quality experience with Costco pricing. So annual membership is $888 a year for everything.
Not
Okay,
bad.
which is very unusual, but it's only by invitation. However, we're going to basically have a lot of our members write and create content and videos and things like that. So there'll be an Athena project, um, app, platform, website, newsletter, right? That will be accessible to the entire world for free.
That's great. So you're almost
And
building a
that we're
media.
going to launch soon.
You're
So
building
that makes sense.
kind of a media brand from the thought leadership that
And
you're
very involved in
creating.
that. So it's people like, okay, and it's not like, again, you have to be like rich, and it's nothing to do with that. It's basically, it's a certain sensibility. So we're not being elitist. We're just saying there's a certain group of people. I think the big thing is, remember I said generosity. It's about generosity and reciprocity. Charging so little as we want their passion, we don't need their money.
Yeah. Well, look, I think
So that's what
there's
that is.
I think there should continue to be a premium on, just because something's exclusive, that doesn't mean that you're being elitist or this or that. I think it's important. Well, Rishad, I want to thank you for coming on for a second time and always being so generous with your time and your thought leadership. I know you've got a skedoodle here,
Yeah,
so if you could point people to connect with you or learn more about what
sure.
you're up to these days, we're gonna link to career architecting.
Yeah.
But anything else you want to point people towards?
So I would say that I'm gonna point people to two resources that are completely free, um, and which they might enjoy. One is my Substack, which is rishad.substack.com. So it's sorry, rishad.substack.com. And that has about 284 pieces of writing, all available for free. Okay. And then the other one is rethinkingwork.io, which is the key learnings from my book. But there is a tab there called Show, where I'm talking to different people who are inventing the future of work. And all of that is also completely free. So rethinkingwork.io and rishad.substack.com. And in both those places, there are ways you can connect with me.
Amazing. Well, Rishad, thanks as always for coming on and sharing your knowledge with our audience. For those of you who are watching at home, if this is the first time you're seeing the show, don't forget to give us a follow or a subscribe. If you're listening to the podcast, an honest review on wherever platform you happen to be listening is how we find a larger audience organically. And last but not least, if there's a technologist out there or somebody who is in brand or marketing land or in business in general that needs to reinvent their final chapter of their career, or just somebody who you think would enjoy the conversation I had with Rishad today, don't forget to share the show. And with that, Rishad, I'll go ahead and let you go. And hopefully let's stay in touch. Maybe I'll see you on the road soon.
Thank you very much. Hopefully a few years from now, if both of us are alive, we'll do it a third time in a cigar.
Yeah, we won't wait 8 years this next one.
All right. Thank